The year is 2012. The air in the State Agricultural Museum is cool. It is quiet. A young reporter stands before a glass case. His name is David. He is working on a story about the pioneers of modern farming. Inside the case is a steering wheel. It is from a John Deere 6600 combine. The plaque beneath it is simple. It lists a name. Frank Miller, owner, Miller & Sons Implement, 1955 to 1992. The text describes him as a pillar of the community, a man who helped hundreds of farmers get their start, a man known for his sound judgment. David jots down a note. He moves to the next exhibit. This one is not in a case. It is a machine, an entire machine. An old Massey Ferguson 510 combine. It is painted a faded red. The paint is chipped. There are welds on the frame, thick, uneven beads of metal. They are clearly not from a factory. The operator's platform is different. The seat is lower. The levers have been shortened, modified. David leans in to read the plaque. The Independence, Eleanor Vance, 1968. He reads the description. It says this machine was used to harvest 1,200 acres of corn and soybeans in a single season by a single person. He reads the next line and stops. His pen hovers over his notepad. The line is a quote attributed to Frank Miller, the same man from the John Deere exhibit, the pillar of the community. The quote is from 1968. It says, "Eleanor, I respect your father more than any man I know, but a woman's place is not in the seat of a 10-ton machine. I cannot in good conscience sell you the new 6,600. David reads the line again. Then he looks at the massive, modified Massey Ferguson. Then he looks back at the name on the plaque. Eleanor Vance. He knows that name. Vance Organics is one of the largest agricultural co-ops in the Midwest. He looks from the quote to the machine, from the refusal to the proof. The room is completely silent, and in that silence, a story begins to take shape. A story about a man's certainty and a woman's harvest. This channel is for stories just like that one. The stories that are found in the silence, in the gap between what someone was told they were and who they chose to become. If you believe these stories need to be told, subscribe to this channel. Because the story of Eleanor Vance is not just about farming. It's about what grows in the soil of refusal. Let me tell you what happened in the fall of 1968. It began with a different kind of silence. The silence of a house after a funeral. The silence of a farm without its farmer. Thomas Vance died on August 12, 1968. A heart attack in the middle of his own field. He left behind a daughter, Eleanor. She was 24 years old. He left behind a farm, 1,200 acres of prime Iowa land. And he left behind a debt to the bank, a debt that was due after the harvest. The harvest was 6 weeks away. The corn was tall. The soybeans were full. The farm was ready. But the farmer was gone, and his combine was broken. The old Massey Ferguson 510 sat in the barn. A cracked engine block was its final testament. Thomas had been meaning to fix it. He just ran out of time. So Eleanor did the only thing she could. She put on her father's work coat. She got in his dusty Ford pickup, and she drove the 12 miles into town, to Miller & Sons Implement, the John Deere dealership. Frank Miller's office was paneled in dark wood. Trophies from the town's Little League team sat on a shelf. Frank had coached for 20 years. He had a kind face, wrinkles around his eyes from decades of smiling. He stood up when Eleanor walked in. He took off his hat. "Eleanor, I was so sorry to hear about your father. He was a good man, one of the best." Eleanor nodded. She appreciated the sentiment, but she was not there for condolences. "Frank, I need a combine." He sat down. He motioned for her to take a seat. "Of course you do. The harvest waits for no one. We can get a custom crew out to you, best in the state. They'll have it done in a week." "No," Eleanor said. "I need to buy a combine. I'm going to harvest it myself." Frank leaned back in his chair. He put his hands behind his head. He studied her for a long moment. He saw a young woman, still reeling from loss, trying to hold on to the only thing she had left. He saw grief. He did not see a farmer. "Eleanor," he said slowly, "harvesting 1,200 acres is a big job for any man, let alone—" He trailed off. He did not want to be unkind. "I can do it," she said. Her voice was quiet, but it was firm. "I've been driving a tractor since I was 10. I helped my father every season. I know the work." Frank sighed. It was a gentle sound, a sound full of paternal concern. Driving a tractor is one thing. Running a new 6600 is another. Those machines are complex. They are dangerous. It takes strength to manage them for 16 hours a day. Physical strength. Eleanor felt a cold knot forming in her stomach. She knew where this was going. "I have the down payment," she said. "My father saved it. For the new machine." She pushed a bank book across the desk. The numbers were all there. Frank didn't look at it. He kept his eyes on her face. "This isn't about money," he said. "This is about safety. It's about what's practical. I have known you since you were a little girl. I am not going to be the man who sells you a machine that gets you hurt, or a machine you can't handle, and then the bank takes this farm, your father's farm." His voice was soft. It was reasonable. Every word he spoke was meant to protect her. And that is what made it so much worse. This was not cruelty. It was not malice. It was certainty. A man's absolute certainty about the limits of a woman. "A woman's place," he said, finally giving the thought its full voice. "A woman's place is managing the books, running the household, not wrestling a 10-ton machine through a cornfield at midnight." He leaned forward. "Let me call the harvesting crew for you. It's the right thing to do. It's what your father would have wanted." Eleanor stood up. She pulled the bank book back across the desk. She looked at the Little League trophies. She looked at the kind, concerned man. A man who thought he was doing the right thing. "You're wrong," she said. She didn't shout. She didn't argue. She just stated it as a fact. Then she turned and walked out of the office, leaving Frank Miller sitting in his certainty, alone in his quiet, wood-paneled room. She drove home, the truck rattling on the gravel road, the dust kicking up behind her. She did not cry. Anger was a fire, but what she felt was cold. It was the coldness of being dismissed, of being erased, not by a villain, but by a good man. A man who thought he was helping. Have you ever been told you couldn't do something? Not out of spite, not out of anger, but by someone who genuinely believed they were protecting you. By someone who was certain of your limits. It is the loneliest kind of fight there is. Because you cannot fight it with anger. You can only fight it with the work. Decades of it sometimes. If you know that feeling, leave a comment below. Tell us what they said you couldn't do. Because what Eleanor Vance did next was the beginning of her answer. She pulled the truck into the farmyard. Her grandfather was sitting on the porch swing. His name was Samuel. He was 80 years old. His hands were gnarled from a lifetime of work. He had seen his son buried 2 days ago. He watched Eleanor get out of the truck. He saw the look on her face. He didn't need to ask. He just waited. She sat down beside him on the swing. The chains creaked. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The sun was setting over the cornfields, painting the sky orange and purple. "Frank Miller won't sell me the combine," she said. Her voice was flat. "He says a woman can't run it. He says he'll send a custom crew." Samuel stopped the swing. He looked out at the land his father had bought, the land his son had died for, the land that was now in the hands of his granddaughter. He turned to her. His eyes were pale blue and clear as a winter sky. "In 1918, he said, "I was in France. Your grandmother was here. She ran this farm for 2 years, alone, with a team of horses and her 2 hands. She planted, she harvested, she saved this place." He reached out and took a handful of dirt from a planter box on the porch. He let the soil run through his fingers. "The dirt doesn't care, Eleanor. It doesn't care if you are a man or a woman. It doesn't care if you are old or young. It only cares about the work." He looked at her, a long, steady look. "The bankers care, the dealers care, the neighbors care, but the dirt doesn't. The dirt is enough." Eleanor looked at her grandfather, at his calloused hands, at the soil falling from his fingers. And in that moment, the cold knot in her stomach began to dissolve. It was replaced by something else, something hard and clear, a purpose. She stood up. "Let's go to the barn," she said. Samuel nodded. He pushed himself up from the swing, and together they walked toward the setting sun, toward the broken machine. The Massey Ferguson 510 was a relic, even in 1968. It was underpowered, it was clumsy, and its engine block was cracked clean through. They stood before it in the dusty light of the barn. The smell of old oil and hay hung in the air. Most men would see a pile of junk, a trip to the scrapyard. Eleanor saw her only chance. Samuel ran his hand over the cold engine. "We can fix it," he said. "It won't be easy, and it won't be new, but it will run." For the next 6 weeks, the barn became their world. They worked from sunrise until long after midnight. The lights of the barn burned like a beacon in the rural darkness. Samuel, with his decades of knowledge, Eleanor, with her fierce, quiet determination. They pulled the engine, a greasy, monstrous block of iron. They hoisted it with chains and a block and tackle. Eleanor's arms ached. Her hands were cut and scraped. She learned the language of machines, the feel of a stripped bolt, the sound of a bearing seating correctly, the smell of gasoline versus diesel. They found a used engine block from a salvage yard 50 miles away. It was from a different model. It didn't quite fit. So they made it fit. Samuel taught her how to weld. She held the torch. The bright blue flame hissed. She laid down thick, ugly beads of metal, joining the old parts to the new. It wasn't pretty, but it was strong. They rebuilt the carburetor, cleaned every jet and nozzle with a tiny piece of wire. They replaced the belts. They rewired the ignition. Eleanor read the service manual by the light of a single bulb. Her father's notes were scribbled in the margins. She felt him there with her. in the familiar grease stains on the pages, in the worn-out tools in the toolbox. As she worked, she changed the machine. She was not as tall as her father. She couldn't reach the levers as easily. So she cut them. She heated them with the torch until they glowed red, bent them into new shapes, shapes that fit her body, her reach. She lowered the seat. She rerouted the hydraulic lines. She was not just fixing the combine. She was making it her own. The neighbors watched. They drove by slowly. They saw the lights in the barn. They talked at the grain co-op. They talked at the church potluck. Some of them pitied her. Poor girl. Lost her father, and now she's losing her mind, trying to fix that old piece of junk. She should just let the custom crew handle it. Others were skeptical. A woman has no business doing that kind of work. It's unnatural. Frank Miller was right to turn her down. But a few were quiet. An old farmer named George. He stopped by one evening. He didn't say much. He just left a box of spare belts on the workbench. Said he didn't need them anymore. The widow from the next farm over, she brought them dinner every night. A hot casserole in a dish. She would leave it on the porch steps. She never stayed to talk. She just knew what it was like to be alone, to have the whole world watching, waiting for you to fail. Finally, the day came. Late September. The corn was dry. The air was crisp. It was time. Eleanor climbed into the seat of the combine, the seat she had lowered. She reached for the levers she had bent. Samuel stood on the ground below. He looked up at her. He just nodded. Once. Eleanor took a deep breath. She turned the key. The engine sputtered. It coughed black smoke. Then it caught. A loud, uneven roar filled the barn. The whole machine shuddered. But it was alive. She engaged the header. The metal teeth began to turn. Slowly at first, then faster. She drove the red machine out of the barn, into the sunlight. She pointed it toward the first row of corn, a vast golden sea, 1,200 acres of it, waiting. She looked back at the farmhouse, at the barn, at her grandfather watching from the yard. Then she looked forward, and she drove into the field, alone. The first day was a disaster. She broke down 3 times. A hydraulic line burst, spraying hot fluid everywhere. She shut it down, climbed out, covered in oil. She wrapped the brake with rubber and clamps. It took an hour. She got back in and started again. The header jammed, corn stalks wrapped around the auger. She had to climb down with a knife and cut it all free. Her hands were bleeding. By nightfall, she had harvested only 10 acres. She was exhausted. She was discouraged. She sat in the cab, the engine off. The silence of the field was immense. She thought about Frank Miller, about his kind, certain voice. Maybe he was right. Maybe this was too much. Then she thought about her grandfather, about the dirt running through his fingers. The dirt is enough. She got out of the cab, walked back to the barn. She ate the casserole the widow had left. She slept for 4 hours, and at 4 a.m., she was back in the field. The second day, she harvested 20 acres. The third day, 30. She learned the rhythm of the old machine, its groans, its vibrations. She learned to listen, to anticipate a problem before it happened. She learned to fix it on the fly, with baling wire, with duct tape, with sheer force of will. She worked 16, sometimes 18 hours a day. She lived on coffee and sandwiches. She saw the sun rise over the corn. She saw it set. She worked under the moon, a single, dusty headlight cutting a path through the darkness. The world shrank to the cab of her combine, the roar of the engine, the sight of the corn stalks being pulled into the header, the feel of the grain filling the hopper. Frank Miller drove past her farm one evening. He was on his way home from the dealership. He saw the single headlight moving slowly across the hill, a tiny speck of light in a vast sea of darkness. He slowed his car. He watched for a long time. He felt something he couldn't quite name. It wasn't anger. It wasn't regret. Not yet. It was a flicker of doubt, a tiny crack in his certainty. He shook his head and drove on. The men at the co-op stopped talking about her. They started watching the numbers. The grain trucks from the Vance farm started arriving. The yields were good, very good. The moisture content was perfect. The quality was high. They looked at the weigh slips. They looked at each other. They didn't say anything, but they knew. Something was happening on that farm. Week after week, she kept going. Through the corn, then the soybeans. The weather held. A long, dry autumn. A gift. Finally, in early November, it was done. She cut the last row of soybeans as the sun was setting. She drove the combine out of the field. The hopper was full. The fields were bare, stubble stretching to the horizon. She parked the machine in the yard. She climbed down from the cab. Her body ached in places she didn't know she had. She was thin. Her face was streaked with dirt and grease. Her hands were a mess of calluses and scars. But she was standing, and she was finished. 1,200 acres. Alone. She walked into the kitchen. Her grandfather was at the table. A ledger book was open in front of him. He had been tracking the yields, the prices, the costs. He looked up at her. He didn't smile. He just pushed the ledger across the table. She looked at the final page, at the bottom line. She had done it. She had saved the farm. She had paid off the banknote. And there was money left over. Not a lot, but enough. Enough for next year's seed. Enough for a new engine block for the combine. A proper one this time. She closed the book. "The dirt is enough," she whispered. "Yes," her grandfather said. "It always is." That winter, she did not go to the John Deere dealership. She drove 60 miles to another town, to a Case dealership. The dealer there didn't know her story. He just saw a farmer with a list of parts. He treated her with respect. He sold her what she needed. And that was the beginning of a new chapter. Because this is where the story of one harvest becomes the story of a lifetime. Let me tell you about the next 30 years. The story can be told in numbers, in acres, and in a single word: cash. 1970. Eleanor Vance bought the 80 acres to the north. The land was worn out. The farmer who owned it had given up. She paid for it in cash. She spent the next 2 years rebuilding the soil, using the cover crop techniques her grandfather taught her. 1973. She bought another 160 acres from a family who wanted to move to the city. She paid for it in cash. She started experimenting with no-till farming, years before it was popular. Her neighbors thought she was crazy. They watched from the road. They saw her fields covered in last year's stubble. They shook their heads. "That's no way to farm," they said. Then they saw her yields. They were higher than theirs, and her costs were lower. She was using less fuel, less fertilizer. The contrast math was simple. She was making more money. Frank Miller saw the numbers. He saw them at the co-op. He saw them in the county reports. He never said a word about it, but he saw them. 1978. She bought a brand new combine, a Gleaner N6, a silver machine. one of the first rotary combines in the county. It was more efficient, gentler on the grain. She paid for it in cash. She never set foot in the John Deere dealership, not once. By 1985, Vance Farms was over 3,000 acres. She was a respected figure in the community. No one talked about a woman's place anymore. They talked about her yields. They talked about her innovation. Young farmers started stopping by, asking for her advice. She always gave it freely. She taught them about soil health, about crop rotation, about financial discipline. Never borrow what you can't pay back in one season, she would say. Stay out of debt. Debt is a cage. She lived simply. She still drove the old Ford truck. She still lived in the same farmhouse, but the farm grew, year after year, a quiet empire built on hard work and smart decisions, built with cash. Frank Miller watched it all. He saw her trucks on the road. He saw her new grain silos going up. He saw the respect she earned. He was older now. His son was running the dealership. But he still came in every day. Sometimes he would stand at the window of his office, the office with the wood paneling and the Little League trophies. He would look out toward the Vance farm, and he would remember that day in 1968, the young woman in his office, the certainty in his own voice, the greatest misjudgment of his professional life. He knew it now, but he had never said it out loud. The reckoning was still to come. But that's not the end of the story, because a legacy isn't just about what you build, it's about what you make possible for others. The year is 1995. The farm crisis of the 80s had taken its toll. Small family farms were disappearing, swallowed up by large corporate operations. Miller and Sons Implement was struggling. Their customers were going out of business. John Deere was pushing them to expand, to take on debt, to modernize. Frank's son, Tom, was in charge. He was a good man, but he was trapped. He sat in the same office his father had. He looked at the same set of books. The numbers were bad. They were a month away from bankruptcy. He saw only one way out, one last desperate chance. He needed a major account, a flagship customer to show the bank and John Deere that they were still viable. He needed Eleanor Vance. Vance Farms was now a 5,000-acre operation, with a fleet of machinery. None of it was green. It was all silver and red. Tom Miller got in his car. He drove to the Vance farm. He asked his father to come with him. Frank was in his late 70s. He was frail. He didn't want to go, but he knew he had to. It was time. They sat at Eleanor's kitchen table, the same table where she had looked at the ledger after her first harvest. Eleanor poured them coffee. She was in her 50s now. Her hair had streaks of gray. Her hands were still the hands of a farmer, strong and capable. She listened patiently as Tom made his pitch. He talked about the new 9000 series combines, the new GPS technology, the financing deals he could offer. He laid out a proposal to switch her entire fleet to John Deere. It would be the biggest deal in the dealership's history. It would save them. When he was finished, the kitchen was silent. Eleanor looked at Tom. Then she looked at his father. Frank had not said a word. He just stared into his coffee cup. Eleanor spoke. Her voice was calm, even. Tom, you run a fine business, and those are good machines. But I have been a loyal customer of Case and AGCO for almost 30 years. They have been good to me. Tom's face fell. He knew it was a long shot. Please, Ms. Vance, just consider it. We're in trouble. This could save our family's business. Eleanor took a slow sip of her coffee. She set the cup down gently. Let me tell you a story, she said. In 1968, A young woman came to your father's office. Her father had just died. She was alone, and she needed a combine to save her family's farm. Frank Miller looked up. His eyes met hers for the first time. That young woman had the down payment, Eleanor continued. She had the will. She had the knowledge. But your father told her no. He told her a woman's place wasn't in the seat of a combine. He told her he was protecting her. He spoke with such kindness, such certainty, and his kindness almost cost me everything. She paused. The only sound was the ticking of the clock on the wall. That day, I learned a lesson, a hard one. You don't build a farm on the kindness of people who are certain of your limits. You build it with partners who believe in your capabilities. The dealer I found 60 miles away, he never once asked me if I could handle the machine. He just asked me which one I wanted. He saw a farmer. Your father saw a woman. She looked at Frank Miller. His face was pale. I built this farm, she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. I built it without your machines. I built it because your father told me I couldn't. And I will not be the one to save the business that refused to help me when I needed it most. She stood up. I think this meeting is over. Tom Miller was speechless. He and his father stood up. They walked to the door. Just before he left, Frank turned back. He looked at Eleanor. His eyes were full of a lifetime of regret. You were right, he said. His voice was a dry rasp. I was wrong. It was the single greatest misjudgment of my life. Eleanor just nodded. She did not say, I know. She did not say, it's okay. She let his admission hang in the air, a truth that had taken 27 years to be spoken. Then she closed the door. Miller & Sons Implement declared bankruptcy 2 months later. Proving someone wrong who thinks they're being kind. It is the loneliest fight there is, and victory does not always feel like a celebration. Sometimes it just feels like the quiet closing of a door. But a legacy is not just about settling old accounts. It is about opening new doors for others. In the years that followed, Eleanor Vance did just that. She saw the struggles of young farmers, the difficulty of getting started, the same gatekeepers, the same walls of certainty she had faced. So she decided to do something about it. In 2001, she created the Vance New Farmer Initiative. It was not a charity. It was an investment. She bought up smaller parcels of land that was being sold to developers. She equipped them with modern, efficient machinery, and she leased them to young farming families who had the passion but not the capital. The leases were affordable, the terms were fair, but there was one condition. At least 50% of the farm's management and labor had to be done by women. Some people grumbled. They called it reverse discrimination. Eleanor just smiled. I'm just correcting a market inefficiency, she would say. The program was a stunning success. It helped launch the careers of dozens of farmers. It revitalized rural communities. It created a network of small, sustainable farms, all operating under the Vance Co-op umbrella. In 2005, she donated $1 million to the state university to create the Eleanor Vance Scholarship for Women in Agriculture. It provides full tuition for young women studying agronomy, engineering, and veterinary science. Today, there are hundreds of Vance scholars working at every level of the agricultural industry. They are researchers. They are business owners. They are farmers. They are running the machines their grandmothers were told they couldn't. Eleanor never married. She never had children of her own. They used to say she was married to the farm. But the truth is, her legacy is her children. Every young woman who got a chance because of her. every family that stayed on their land because of her. Every person who was judged on the quality of their work, not the assumptions of others. That is her family. That is her harvest. And what about the old combine? The Massey Ferguson 510, the Independence. It sat in the barn for decades, a monument of faded red paint and ugly welds. In 2010, the State Agricultural Museum called. They wanted to create an exhibit about her impact on farming. She said yes, on one condition. She wanted the combine to be the centerpiece, and she wanted the plaque to include the quote, Frank Miller's quote. The curator was hesitant. "It feels a bit pointed," he said. "History should be pointed," Eleanor replied, "especially when it's been rounded off for too long." So they moved the combine to the museum. They placed it not far from the exhibit honoring Frank Miller, the pillar of the community. And there they sit today, 2 stories, side by side. One about a man's certainty, the other about a woman's work. A quiet conversation, happening in the cool, still air of a museum. If you go to that museum today, you can stand in front of that old machine. You can see the levers she bent with her own hands. You can see the welds she laid down in the dark of the barn. It is not just a piece of equipment. It is a physical artifact of a decision. A decision to reject the limits someone else created for you. A decision to trust the work, to trust the dirt. Eleanor Vance passed away in 2018. She was 74 years old. She left the farm, all of it, to the co-op she created, ensuring it would continue to support new generations of farmers forever. Her story is a reminder that the most dangerous limitations are not the walls we see. They are the ones that are presented to us as shelter. The most damaging words are not the ones spoken in anger. They are the ones spoken with kind, gentle, absolute certainty. Right now, somewhere in the world, someone is sitting in an office, across the desk from a good person, a decent, respected person, and that good person is explaining to them, with all the kindness in the world, why they can't, why they shouldn't, why they aren't strong enough, or smart enough, or ready. That person is being told about their own limits, and they have a choice. They can accept that certainty, or they can go home, walk into their own barn, and start building their own machine, a machine to prove them wrong. If this story reminded you of someone who needs to hear it, someone who is facing their own Frank Miller, share it with them. Because sometimes the story of a harvest from 50 years ago is the seed that's needed for today. Subscribe for more stories of quiet rebellion, and never let anyone else tell you what you're capable of. The dirt is waiting. The work is enough.